Hi guys, good evening. Thanks for coming out for our third event series of our In the World Summer Series. I just want to begin tonight by going over again what our mission statement is for this, and that is to open a space for believers of our community to develop a perspective on how to love marginalized people through worship, prayer, listening, and learning for the glory of God and to further His kingdom. We've already had the pleasure of hearing from Laura Coleman of Araminta Freedom Initiative, and she discussed with us the dark reality of human trafficking and the prevalence of it in our own community and how we can become involved against the fight against that injustice, in the fight against that injustice. Last month, we also heard from Sharice Daniels of Messiah University, and she shared with us the differences and realities that our brothers and sisters of color experience, and the need for reconciliation across the racial divide. Tonight's session is entitled Loving People with Addictions, and we're very excited to welcome John Burkhauser, Justin Talbot, and Russ Wernick of Stauros Ministries. Many of you may be familiar with Stauros, as John has preached here before and also led workshops here at FRBC, along with partners of the ministry. Stauros Ministries seeks to bring the comfort and compassion of God to individuals who are affected by drug and alcohol addictions by providing support to them and their families and pointing them to Christ. As you may notice, tonight's session will look a little bit different than our previous two, as we have 3 presenters instead of 1. And so we ask that, unless prompted, you hold on to your questions and refrain from asking them during the presentation. And if you do have questions, please just write them down quietly at your seat, and there'll be space, time permitting, for a later part of the segment to ask them. And then, of course, questions may also be asked at the conclusion of the meeting in private. So I'll pray for us, and then we can get started. Dear God, thank you for this evening. Thank you for our church and our desire to learn and grow together. Thank you for John and Justin and Russ being here tonight with us and helping us to learn more about loving people with addictions. Help us to open our minds to what they have to say, and I pray that we can just help to further your kingdom through our education tonight. Amen.
Thanks, Maddie, for the introduction. And again, many of you do know me, as I have had the privilege to come over the years and preach here and do various things, and appreciate the opportunity. Of course, you know Russ as well. Russ is one of our board members. He was invited on a few years back and accepted that invitation, so he's one of our 9 board members. And Justin Talbot is one of the first gentlemen that I met with in Stauros, and we'll hear a little bit about him, from him, as the evening goes on. And Justin does volunteer work with us as of October last year, and pursuing a little more with our ministry work. And again, we'll touch on that some as we go. But we do appreciate the opportunity to come tonight, and I just wanted to spend a few moments. Some of you are very familiar with Stauros, and some of you would not be quite as familiar. And then I know we do have individuals watching online, and then we hope to send this out to folks as well. So we want to give a bit of a description of who we are, what we do, and hope you'll bear with us as we do that. These are the 6 articles that we're going to cover tonight, so hopefully anything that you're thinking about, any questions you might have, will be answered in these. We're going to look at our roots for a moment. We're looking at understanding an addict. We're going to look at understanding people, and then how you can help us, available resources that we have, and then a bit of a summary. As Maddie mentioned, we'll certainly open it up for some questions. One of the reasons we don't have questions commonly in our presentations is a lot of times they are personal, and they're things that are hard to answer in a group setting or from a platform. So if you have a question about someone in your family, please don't leave without asking us. We don't want you not to ask. We just want to avoid some of that in the context of a group setting. Who are we? Well, Stauros is a Greek word for the cross. So if you were to read the New Testament in Greek, when you came across the word cross, you would see the word Stauros. And so Arthur Williams, the founder, who has been here on a number of occasions. He passed away a few years ago, but he has preached here and led a conference, I believe, 3 or 4 years ago, up on Memorial Day weekend. But he just said that he believed that everything that we deal with in life that is troublesome can be dealt with and should be dealt with at the cross of Jesus Christ. So that's really where the name comes from. Formed in Scotland in 1980 by Arthur Williams, came to America in 1995-ish with Tom Eakins and Arthur Williams and a few other gentlemen that came over. Tom is unable to travel because of health. He's preached here before. Many of you know him. You can pray for him. Forge Road Chapel and Brooklyn Bible Chapel and my home church, White Marsh, we all contributed about 15 years ago for him to have a rod put in his ankle to fuse his leg together. Well, that came loose about a month ago, so he had to have that repaired in Belfast, and then it got infected. So he's in the hospital right at this very moment. So if you can pray for Tom Eakins. But Tom has been very integral in my life and in the lives of others involved with Stauros. Woody Price, many of you would know him. I asked him to record a video. He recorded a short video. Woody was commissioned by Forge Road Bible Chapel. He's going to mention that here. So I'm going to play this for just a moment, and you'll get to know Woody a little bit.
Well, greetings from Northern Ireland. My name is Woody Price. And welcome to the Loving People with Addictions here at Forge Road Bible Chapel and those that are listening online. My wife Elaine and I are very grateful for the fellowship and support of Forge Road over the years. John Burkhauser asked me to give a short history about how the Stauros Ministries got started here in Baltimore. In 1992, I was commended to the work of the Lord to Dublin, Ireland, to work with an organization called Ireland Outreach, which distributed Bibles and Bible study courses free of charge to schools, and I was tasked to install a new computer system. It was there that I met Elaine from Belfast, Northern Ireland, and we got married in 1994 in Belfast. And moved then to Baltimore straight after that. Upon moving back, Bill and Lois Dunkerton had started a Bible study in their home with new converts to the Christian faith, with people coming from difficult addiction backgrounds. And Elaine and I started to meet with them. And at the encouragement of Elaine, I started to meet with one of the men that went to that particular study to do a one-to-one discipleship Bible study. And it was through God's Word in that study with him that I saw him get freed from his addiction and compulsiveness and enjoy freedom in Jesus. And as we were involved, Elaine saw that Stauros in the UK could be of help. And Elaine had been saved from an alcohol background and had been involved with Stauros and their meetings in Belfast in the past. She wrote to Tom Eakins, who she knew from Stauros, to come and see all the alcoholics in Baltimore, as if that's some kind of tourist attraction. And at the time, Tom felt that the Lord was leading him to go to a land that he hadn't been before. And this was from reading about Abraham and how he was led by God to go to a land that he had not known. Tom and Stan Gowdy from Stauros in Northern Ireland flew over in 1995, and this started a long and very profitable relationship between us and Hillendale, as it was known at the time, and Stauros, and Tom and other Stauros staff and volunteers, including Arthur Williams, who founded the work of Stauros, visited as often as 4 times a year to help establish the work. I was sold on the work of Stauros when Arthur Williams was preaching at my father's church in Martinsburg, West Virginia, which was Pilgrim Presbyterian Church, and his opening comment was, "I wish to speak to you tonight about the Christ of the cross." It is what Stauros is about, how Jesus and his death on the cross meets every need of man, including addictions. His group was started in Hillendale with the help of a number of couples interested in reaching addicts, including John and Peg Ziegenfuss, Jim and Dottie Traban, Doug and Brenda Hart, and Steve and Kathy Veltman. Some were from very difficult backgrounds themselves, and these meetings were held in different homes every Friday night for a number of years, and we saw many people helped through the ministry. Stauros Ministries was founded as a charity with me and my father as the first board members, and in 1997 the UK called us to join the pastoral team in Northern Ireland, and we were commended to the work by Forge Road in 1998 and have been since serving the Lord. During the early days, we came into contact with John Burkhauser, who was just out of jail, and Tom Eakin started to develop a relationship with him and Peggy over the years, and outreach had developed in the Baltimore area, along with areas in West Virginia, Georgia, and Florida. So I trust that today will be a blessing to you. Thank you.
So just a little greeting from Woody, and we appreciate his devotion and dedication. And I also wanted you all here to be reminded of the integral part that you have played in helping people. And we'll talk about that some as we go on. Again, my name is John Burkhauser, as he mentioned, and I mentioned to you as well. I was saved in 1996. I was incarcerated then, and I got saved and then still had to pay for my bad deeds. So I was incarcerated as a Christian man for 8 months, as it turned out, on a year sentence. But that was quite a change for me, those 8 months that I spent. Got out of jail and, again, had been saved at that point. In 2000, I began meeting with some people. I had attended his group. It was at Woody's home and in various places, again, at the old Hillendale Bible Chapel. I attended there, met Tom. He had reached out to me. I was saying to Stephen when we were setting up this evening, we're going to look at some verses as we go through this evening. But one of the things that really struck me was Tom sitting in a room, and he said, "If the Bible says, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creation. Old things have passed away, all things are new." And I thought, there's no way that he would see me as a different person. And he said, "Well, I'm not promising that to you." He said, "That's what God says." And that was a turning point in my life. That really was. I share that with men and women today when I have opportunity. And that's one verse. We received a few email questions that we asked for ahead of time, and I appreciate those of you that sent questions so we could try to work them in. And that's one of them. Well, what are some of the verses that you can share with someone? And that's one of them. And so in 2000, I began meeting with individuals. We began a Stauros meeting in our home. My wife and I, at the time, were living on Silver Spring Road. And then I left my full-time work in 2003. I was a heavy equipment operator and then a superintendent estimator with a pretty large utility contracting company in Baltimore. But I was able to leave that in 2003, so I'm in my 18th year of serving the Lord full-time. So just wanted to give you some of the background of who we are. We have some volunteer workers. We've had some over the years come and go that have helped, and we still have individuals that do that. We have a board of directors, 9 members, Russ being one, John Ziegenfuss being one that you would know of, and then some men and women from other areas. But we wanted you to know, too, that we do have a group behind us. We're not just doing our own thing. We have some statistics, and Russ is going to stand and read these to you. I have some on the screen. He's going to read more than what we have, but I want you to think about this a little bit, some of the statistics of addictions.
And the funny part, when you look at a number and statistics, once you put a face to a number or a face to an addiction, a loved one, family member, a friend, then it starts to make sense a little bit. But some of these numbers are really phenomenal. Almost 21 million Americans have at least one addiction, yet only 10% of them receive treatment. And you wonder, why is that, And addiction's not just drugs and alcohol. There's a lot of other addictions, and I think we'll cover some of that. Drug overdose deaths have more than tripled since 1990, and I think we'll see some of the things come out too, whereas there was a big push for opioid painkiller prescription medications being fairly widely distributed by doctors and for legitimate reasons, and once those supplies ran out, the next step was to find a substitute, and a lot of people went to heroin. And as we know, heroin's been mixed with fentanyl, and that caused a lot of overdose deaths over the years. 2017, 34.2 million Americans committed DUI, 21.4 million under the influence of alcohol, and 12.8 million under the influence of drugs. And that's the ones that have been caught. I'll tell you, if I got caught doing some of the stuff I did when I was a kid, I wouldn't be here right now. I'd still be in jail. So just, I was speeding on the way back from New Jersey yesterday. So, just think of all the times you haven't been caught, and those numbers would probably be astronomical. 20% of Americans who have depression or an anxiety disorder have a substance abuse disorder. And why is that? We'll see that substance is kind of used to dull pain and dull these types of feelings of depression and anxiety and try to make you fit in. More than 90% of the people who have an addiction started to drink alcohol or use drugs before they were 18 years old. And I think, John, that was you, right?
Yes.
Americans between the ages of 18 and 25 are most likely to use addictive drugs. And sometimes it just starts out with maybe some beer and marijuana. And you're always chasing that initial high, that euphoria. I always want to see that euphoria that I got when I first started taking drugs, and it spirals out of control. About 88,000 people die as a result of alcohol every year in the United States, and that's just phenomenal. I mean, it takes a long time to die from alcohol poisoning. And I know Brad and Lindsay are dealing with a lot of that up in Alaska with fetal alcohol syndrome and parents giving birth to babies that are addicted to alcohol. And that's a lifelong struggle for a kid growing up, because it really messes you up. About 6% of American adults, and that would be 15 million people, have an alcohol use disorder, but only 7% of Americans who are addicted to alcohol ever receive treatment. And a question again, why is that? Men between the ages of 18 and 25 are most likely to binge drink and become alcoholics. And a lot of testimonies I've seen online, whereas guys start out partying on the weekend. They go off to college and, the party scene, the fraternity scene, and all that stuff. And next thing you know, they're not finishing their college, and they can't go to classes anymore because they're too busy getting drunk or stoned or whatever. About 130 Americans die every day from an opioid overdose. So that's over to state, if you want to put it into state perspective. And I think it's a lot better now because they have those, what are those things called, John? The pens?
The naloxone.
Yeah, so, before that came out, I mean, there wasn't much you could do is rush somebody to the hospital and hope they can be revived. In 2020, doctors issued, get this, 2020, 191 million opioid prescriptions. Now, that's not opioid pills, that's opioid prescriptions. A slight decline over the 200 million opioid prescriptions, which they issued the year before, from 2007 to 2017. And you think, okay, well, we're making a little progress. But if you remember, the government stepped in and really put the hammer down on pharmacies and doctors prescribing opioids because of the problem. So is that really a positive trend? I can't say it is.
One of the things, Russ, as we were discussing, the three of us on several occasions tonight, we talked about that statistic, and we wondered if that was a good thing, right? Less is better. And that's true. But I shared with the guys that one of the things I've encountered with two men, particularly in the last couple of years, one of them has passed away. And what has happened was, because of the crackdown on pain medications, that is a good thing in a lot of ways. But some of the things we don't often recognize, one gentleman from Dundalk that I was meeting with, met with him for quite a number of years. He was on heroin originally because of a physical condition that afflicted him that was obvious. He had some physical conditions that disabled him severely, and he was on pain medication that he really couldn't get much, so he started taking heroin. And he got off heroin, but was still on some pain medication. He got word that he was going to be totally cut off in about a year from all pain medication. And he didn't know how to deal with that. And when he died, his mother called me. He lived with his mom. I went to visit. I went down to the house to help her called the coroner, and we looked for his medication. He had just gotten a fresh prescription. We couldn't find it anywhere. And he had told me about 6 months before that he was, seriously thinking of maybe taking his life because he couldn't envision the prospect of not having pain medication that he was using, as prescribed. So I just wanted to interject that because we're thinking about loving people. So we want to be careful with that because sometimes folks really do need pain medications. And so we want to be careful. I will often say to his mother, there's a difference between dependence and addiction. He was dependent on it, but he really did need it. And we're not, still to this day, I see her, and we talk about that. We're saddened that he's gone. He was in his early 50s, but we just wonder if he didn't end his life because he was just horrified at the prospect of not being able to get his pain medication that he needed and had been using in the proper fashion.
Yeah. A couple of more, and then we'll move on. Since 1999, the sale of opioid painkillers have skyrocketed by 300%. And now you see the big trend. It's almost like a cyclical thing where all these lawsuits now are being settled by these pharmaceutical companies that have, manufactured and distributed opioids. I think back in the day I remember when they first came out and I had back surgery and I was prescribed opioids and it was supposed to be non-addictive. And I noticed by the 4 or 5 weeks I was on it, when I started weaning myself off of it, it was really difficult. About 5% of people with an opioid use disorder will try heroin, and that's the beginning of the end, man. Wow. And we know some people near and dear to us that have tried heroin. We got a little video that we'd like to show you. Kind of just a cute, short little video on addiction.
Our current theory of addiction comes in part from a series of experiments that were carried out earlier in the 20th century. The experiment is simple. You take a rat and put it in a cage with 2 water bottles. One is just water, the other is water laced with heroin or cocaine. Almost every time you run this experiment, the rat will become obsessed with the drugged water and keep coming back for more and more until it kills itself. But in the 1970s, Bruce Alexander, a professor of psychology, noticed something odd about this experiment. The rat is put in the cage all alone. It has nothing to do but take the drugs. What would happen, he wondered, if we tried this differently? So he built Rat Park, which is basically heaven for rats. It's a lush cage where the rats would have colored balls, tunnels to scamper down, plenty of friends to play with, everything a rat about town could want. And they would have the drugged water and the normal water bottles. But here's the fascinating thing. In Rat Park, rats hardly ever use the drugged water. None of them ever use it compulsively. None of them ever overdose. We need to think about addiction differently. Human beings have an innate need to bond and connect. When we are happy and healthy, we will bond with the people around us. But when we can't, because we're traumatized, isolated, or beaten down by life, we will bond with something that gives us some sense of relief. It might be endlessly checking a smartphone, it might be pornography, video games, Reddit, gambling, or it might be cocaine. But we will bond with something because that is our human nature. The path out of unhealthy bonds is to form healthy bonds, to be connected to people you want to be present with. Addiction is just one symptom of the crisis of disconnection that's happening all around us. We all feel it. Since the 1950s, the average number of close friends an American has been steadily declining. At the same time, the amount of floor space in their homes has been steadily increasing. To choose floor space over friends, to choose stuff over connection. The war on drugs we've been fighting for almost a century now has made everything worse. Instead of helping people heal and getting their life together, we have cast them out from society. We have made it harder for them to get jobs and become stable. We take benefits and support away from them if we catch them with drugs. We throw them in prison cells, which are literally cages. We put people who are not well in a situation that makes them feel worse and hate them for not recovering. For too long, we've talked only about individual recovery from addiction. But we need now to talk about social recovery, because something has gone wrong with us as a group. We have to build a society that looks a lot more like Rat Park and a lot less like those isolated cages. We are going to have to change the unnatural way we live and rediscover each other. The opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection.
A number of years ago, I wrote an article for one of our newsletters about sobriety. And if you look it up in a dictionary, the common thought for somebody dealing with an addiction would be to be sober is to be clean. But really, the word sobriety, if you look it up and study some of the history of it, it's really to make good choices, to do the right thing, to walk with integrity. So certainly that would contain being free of substances, but it's not the sole thing. And so many men and women are wrestling and fighting, much as I did, to stop, but they really don't know what to do. Back in 1996, I mentioned that I got saved and got clean. But before that, I'm going to just share a brief testimony because we really want to transition now into what it looks like to extend love to someone addicted. I grew up on a farm, actually right at the intersection of Franklin Square Boulevard and Campbell Boulevard. There's a Applebee's and such there. That's where my house was. That was called Nottingham Farm. It was a 2,500-acre dairy farm at the time, and we farmed all that area. And so I actually live in a condo in the cow pasture I used to play in right now. So you can actually go home, as they say. But I was 13. I'm the youngest of 6. And my father was a drunk. He was an alcoholic, but he worked hard. It took me a lot of years to actually find something good that I found from my upbringing. And he provided a good, strong work ethic, and he did some good things. For many years, I just saw him as somebody who didn't fulfill his role as a father and a husband. He failed in a lot of ways, but there were good things in that. But I was raised on that farm, and I got arrested when I was 14 or 15 for marijuana possession over at a farmer's market on Route 40, used to be there. And my parents drove me home and thought, how could you get in trouble? You live on a farm without neighbors, But I found the things I was looking for, not because, Russ mentioned earlier about some of the euphoria that we do get from drugs. Mine was being so lonely in myself. Even though I had 4 sisters and a brother, I didn't feel like I belonged. So at age 13, I started using substances. I stopped at age 33. So for 20 years, 15 of those was a daily occurrence, was pretty heavily involved with opiates as they were back then. They were a little different drugs back in those days. But what happened for me, and we're going to touch on that some tonight, was the loneliness that I felt was what drove me to numb that loneliness and that pain. Not fitting in, not belonging. And so I did go into school, and by age 16, I was using LSD and cocaine and drugs like that on a regular basis to just to modify my mood. And I would drink heavily to sleep and then take those things in the mornings to go to school and to be able to function. But by age 18, I tried to take my life with a knife. I carved on my stomach for a while because I knew something was really wrong. Well, my mother was a Christian. And she used to pray for me, and she would tell me that. And we were dragged to church. I didn't want to go, but we were taken as kids, and I appreciated that later in life. At the time, I wasn't too happy about that. I tell parents today, if you take your kids, do it anyway, even if they don't want to go. And they probably do that, but I urge them, because even though they might not want to do that, it's good for them. At age 18, I did try to take my life, and it didn't work. And then I got a job and was working fairly well, moving up the ladder, but the addiction got a lot worse. I was age 24. I remember my mother saying to me that if I didn't change, then nobody would ever want me. What do you do with that? I thought, wow. But that struck me, and at the time I was horrified by that. But that started me on the pathway of making some change. I tried to do some things in my life to change my circumstances. I was successful to some level, but I still had this loneliness inside, this just incredible sense of not wanting to be here. So I tried to take my life again at age 24, was unsuccessful. But then I met my wife, who is my wife still today. I met her, and she's good with time. I'm terrible with time. She always gets on me, but I lose track of the dates. She knows dates like an idiot savant of everything, and I just don't. But so she'll correct me later because I never can remember. But we met when I was around 26 years old, and I was playing in bars and clubs out in Ellicott City playing music. And she was a roommate of a friend of mine that I was playing music with. We met, got married, And the first 6 years was pretty bad because I was still drinking quite heavily and still using cocaine quite a bit. And she was doing it some with me. But she started changing. And we came to a place 6 years into our marriage where we knew it had to change. And I got arrested 3 times for drunk driving within a 14-month period. That's what subsequently landed me in jail. But the last time, she said that was it. And she was serious. She's not a person to throw out threats. And so I left that night. And actually, she kicked me out because I was drunk, and I wound up getting arrested again that night. And went to my mother's house because I didn't know where else to go once I was bailed out. And tried to take my life again with a shotgun. And, of course, wasn't successful in that. But we were seeing a counselor who said to Peggy that John was very bad off, maybe let him come home for a bit. And so I went home to shower because I hadn't showered in 3 days. I worked a Friday in the summer heat and then got locked up, and so I was in jail for 3 days. But went home and showered and got saved in the shower. And my wife was laying in the bed crying, and she said, "I don't want you to leave." And we didn't know what happened. We are an example of people who weren't saved at any kind of event. We just got saved seemingly indiscriminately. We began attending a Roman Catholic church because my wife was raised Roman Catholic, and then we started going to White Marsh Baptist Church the same day. And eventually she decided she was more interested in what we were learning from the Bible, and so we began attending there. The pastor came to visit us, and he said, "Would you like to pray for the Lord in your life?" And she was surprised that I said yes, and we both did. And really, I almost liken it to Acts when Peter and John went down, but we had already been saved. He really came to confirm for us what the Lord had already done. But I share that in part because to let you know a bit of the background that I come from, but also that we just don't know when that day might come. For those of you here that have loved ones or are reaching out, we don't know. That day was just like a blink of an eye, and nobody could have seen that coming. I mean, yeah, things were getting worse, but they had been terrible for me. So people would say to me, "Well, you had nowhere else to go," but I did. But the Lord came in, and that was from a praying mother. I attribute it really to her because I didn't know anybody else then. I wasn't around anybody who was a Christian, and nobody really knew me. And I really do attribute that to the Lord's hand, but to a mother who prayed for me. And we're going to touch on that a few more times, that experience, because I want to let you know a little bit about what I've learned over the years in ministry about extending love. But I'm going to ask Russ to stand and read a letter. We had one of the questions we got was what our definition of addiction is. We as a ministry don't have a declared position on what addiction is defined as. I meet with a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds and churches and denominations. I meet with secular doctors and people that aren't believers. And if we just say it's a sin issue, they'll tune us out right away. And so deep in my heart, personally, I do believe that, as Woody alluded to and Arthur Williams did. But we don't broadcast that as a position all the time outrightly, not because we're trying to be wishy-washy, but we're not looking to turn off somebody. We want them to understand what's going on. One of the definitions is that it's defined as a chronic relapsing disorder characterized by compulsive drug seeking. The Rat Park sort of alluded to that. Continued use despite harmful consequences and long-lasting changes in the brain. That's really the short medical definition of an addiction. And we do hold to that because there are people who say to their loved ones, this person I mentioned who passed away, the first 5 years I was meeting with him, his mother would be around. And she said, I just told him if he'd pray, God would deliver him out of that. And I said to her, would you stop? I don't disagree with you, but that's not helpful for him right now. He actually needs help medically to detox from a substance that his body needs, or else he'll die. So it's I got a phone call from a gentleman just about 10 days ago, and Russ alluded to naloxone, and his son, he wasn't sure what was going on with his son. And his son overdosed, as it turned out, and the paramedics came and revived him, and they left naloxone for him. And within 24 hours, his son overdosed again and essentially was dead. And his father gave him naloxone and then gave him CPR. Then he went into the hospital, and I'm trying to be open for a conversation with him. But he needed that. His father's, I just met him, but he's a professing believer. And he could have just said, well, let's just pray because it's a sin issue, right? So, yeah, long term, we want to look at that. But initially, we need to understand what can happen. But Russ is going to read a letter. This is actually Justin's mom. we asked her to write a letter, and she's here this evening, but Russ is going to read a letter that she wrote about how she was ministered to by Tom Eakins, the gentleman that Woody alluded to. So Russ, if you would read that, appreciate that.
Before I start the letter, I met Justin about, I think 6 months ago or so. We sometimes get together with John and we talk about ministry things, and Justin was there. And I've never been an addict, so I don't really know what it's like to be an addict. I can tell you what it's like to be a sinner, but I don't know what it's like to be an addict. And by the grace of God, that's just His mercy on me. But Justin, I asked that question: why would somebody want to be an addict? And that thing has crossed my mind so many times. And fortunately, Justin was there, and he went through the process of why a person would get to the point of being addicted to substance, and that just blew me away. That blew me away, hearing that story. And we all have stories like that, whether it's addiction, whether it's relationships, whether it's, you name it, you put a title to it, but we all have that story. And fortunately, we have the insight of God's story, where He allowed His Son to come and redeem just a sinful humanity back to God. And what a great and awesome thing. I'm thankful for that. But here's a little note from Justin's mom. Tom's statement changed my life, and I think you're referring to Tom Eakins. I came to church to hear a man from Ireland speak about Stauros, a ministry I've never heard of, but had a very personal interest in. And that's kind of my story too. I got interested too in addictions when it got kind of close to home. My son had a problem with an addiction, and I was being told by doctors and counselors that he had a disease he was going to have to live with for the rest of his life. Fight against for the rest of his life, every single day. Get up and say, today I won't do drugs. This was the most discouraging, depressing thing a parent can hear. Can you think about that? If you can put a face to the name, Justin's sitting right here. Your child has an incurable disease, and society thinks this disease is self-inflicted. I'm not given to depression, but I was depressed. Not only that, but I didn't have peace about this diagnosis either. Then I heard Tom Eakins speak. Tom said that addiction was sin, plain and simple. Get your heart right with God, and you can get this sin out of your life. It won't be easy because this sin has a physical hold. But after a short period of time away from it, that's gone. There is no disease for life. There is no disease for life, just sin, like everyone else. I started sobbing. I felt a huge weight lift from my shoulders. I knew Tom was right. I didn't know it, but my son's journey with Stauros and John Burkhauser began that night. John placed me there at a specific time to hear that specific message. We really do serve an amazing God. And God's story is all about timing, isn't it? Sometimes you'll be at a place and you'll wonder, why am I here? I told John that a number of times, I don't know what I'm doing here, John. I can't do anything to help you. And something amazing happens, and God just puts a person there that they needed to hear something that you had to say that you felt would be meaningless. So just keep that in the back of your mind as you continue to write your story with the Lord.
Amen. Thanks, Ross. Again, we're thinking about loving people in addictions. How do we do that? I'm not a parent. I won't be. My wife and I have never had children, but I was one, and I'm around folks. And I was the son to a mother, much like Justin's mom, very identical. Some of the things that we want to share with you that are in relation to questions that get asked. One of them is about what Jane mentioned in this note here. I'm careful. I'm not looking to offend people that are involved in recovery. But part of what Tom shared with me, the same Tom, about if any man be in Christ, he's a new creation. I would not. I don't stand firm so to speak, with a flagpole. But I do declare very strongly that I'm not an addict, because if I'm a new creation, I can't be both. And we try to share that with people. We don't try to just fill them with happy thoughts, but we try to declare what the Word of God says. And he tells us that he sees us as a new creation. And so for loving those in addiction, this is not easy for parents or loved ones with someone, but to be able to see them in a different way than the behavior that they're performing. That's part of what we hope to fill you with some this evening, is the ability to be able to do that. We're going to talk about some of how that is done. My mother, I can guarantee you, this was many years ago, and so there wasn't a lot of professional helps around. And we lived on a farm. We really had no neighbors, so she wasn't around many people, literally. But I can guarantee you that she would have been labeled codependent. Some of you may have heard that term. I despise that term. I despise that term. They'll tell you that you're as sick as the addict if you don't kick them out, if you don't put your foot down, if you don't declare something. I don't know for sure. There's no way to know. Justin and I have talked about this quite a lot. We're very similar. If she would have kicked me out, I really don't think I would have lived. I don't know that. I can't prove that. But I know me. I know how bad I was, not just in my drugs, but in my life skills. So one of the first questions to answer is that. Do I need to kick them out? Can't answer that. We can't answer that. I'm jumping ahead a little bit in some of our thing, but I feel it's appropriate. When people ask me, when families ask me that question, I would say to them, I can't answer that, but I'll help you find the answer to that for your family and support you in that. How do we define addiction? I think, haven't mentioned it to Jane because she wrote this for us recently, but we'll probably steal some of her writing and add that in and use that a little bit more. We look at it as a problem that needs to be addressed. Can God deliver someone out of a heroin addiction without them seeking any help and treatment? Sure. He can do anything, and I believe that, and I've seen that. But that's not the common way. People need help. They need to get that, and we need to help them with that if they're willing. But underpinning all of that is knowing that they need the Lord. If you remember, some of you might remember Bill Clark. He presented a workshop here 10 years ago maybe, back in the room off the kitchen. He's with the Lake Counselor Institute, and I know Grace Fuqua, she does work with LCI. And Russ and I and Grace, and we've been to some of their workshops and seminars, and we had Bill come up here, and he presented a workshop here. And he's a licensed clinical counselor, and he said that his goal is 1 and 1A. 1 is addressing the presenting problem, the issue that people are dealing with. 1A is to evangelize. So, it's a close in there. I'm always wanting to present hope in the Lord to someone, but firstly, we want to help them with what they're dealing with and the issues that are before them. So we define it, we look at it in that way, but we also realize that ultimately it is a matter of someone knowing that God can help them, and then as he helps them, he sees them differently than they would see themselves, much like in the case of myself. So I put a frequently asked questions up there. These are some things that we're going to discuss based on some questions that you all sent in and some of the questions that I get asked. I'm hoping that the questions that you all might have, we'll answer those. Again, as Maddie mentioned early on, please come to us afterwards. We don't want to quell any questions. We just want to try to answer them as best we can in the time that we have. So Justin's going to take us for a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, once again, thank you so much for having us here. I think for any time, at least as I've been alive, there's no better time than now to start really focusing on how we should love each other, and not just think nicely about people, but what real love is, action. So thank you for having us. Thank you for the questions that you guys sent in. What I'm going to do is just incorporate some of my story into those questions that I'm going to ask John. So brief background, I met John a little over 20 years ago during when I entered the dark period of addiction. The party's over, you are not deciding how you engage with the substance. It dictates everything about your life. And that was when I think you had joined the church probably about a couple years before you and Peggy. And my mother had mentioned John, and he was actively looking for people to help. And we spoke, and even though I wasn't too deep into the real bad part of the addiction I just entered, you learn very quickly how people are treating you, how they see you. When if any of you think about maybe like a weakness that you have, when someone is they're looking at you through the lens of that weakness. Mm-hmm. And when I spoke with John, I noticed something different, and it's something that I always try to remember when I deal with anyone, whether it's an addiction or anything similar. John didn't treat me like a charity case, didn't treat me like a villain, and didn't treat me like a leper. And honestly, if you really want to hurt someone, treat them with it, show pity towards them. When you live an addicted lifestyle, it's much easier for people to be angry with you. That's actually, you can get used to that. But to have someone just pity you and treat you like a charity case, it's not a good feeling. But John wasn't like that. And, like John said, we hit it off. We have a lot of the same sort of interests. And John was just sort of starting out in his little career of helping crazy people like myself, because he was and still is a bit of a crazy guy, right, John? So, and John would also ask for my help with things. Over the years, over the last 20 years, we've visited churches. I've helped him, play music. We traveled to Ireland together. So there were a lot of things that were I hate to use the word right, but things that were really done in the proper way and how you should treat someone who is suffering. So that's kind of a segue into one of the questions, which is, that's how I met John. So how do you usually meet the people that you help? How do you find them? How do they find you?
Yep. So one of the things that's important to me is, and I checked with Justin ahead, we talked about tonight on a few occasions, and just to add to his story, just as an example, his mother gave me a key to the house, and for quite a long time I would go in and just sit next to him while he was out of it or sleeping or something. Again, I know some of your parents may do that. Parents would say to me, shouldn't I do something? I don't know. All I know is sometimes the best we can do is to be with someone. And that's not a real solid, definitive answer, but that's loving, is just being able to be there, not necessarily demanding change. That's very hard. I can't imagine as a parent sitting by and watching that, but sometimes that's what we do. And as Justin asked that question, I did ask him, we wanted to have that in there. I get a little put off, truthfully, by some individuals who say to me that I need to be on the streets of Baltimore. That's where the real need is. Because I can ride through White Marsh and Perry Hall, which I do, and Towson, Dundalk and Essex, and through the West Virginia corridors where I travel, and show you men and women who do still barely have a house, maybe barely have a family, barely have a spouse, barely have a job. And I would take issue that they're any less in need than a man or a woman who is visibly destitute. So I find I want to share that in part because sometimes people who haven't lost everything aren't convinced they're in need of help just yet. And I often say to people, let's stop the elevator halfway down. You don't have to wait for it to get to the bottom, because people assume you have to hit rock bottom to seek help. That's not true. You don't have to go that far. You don't have to go that far. And so I just want to encourage you, too, that we want to be careful as we're loving, that love isn't letting them hit rock bottom. Love is finding a way to intervene. And the other part with that pertained with Justin, too, was people will say, and people call me and say, well, if they want help, they'll call you. And that's not necessarily true. I'm more than willing to call someone if they're willing to talk. I'm not going to force myself on anyone. But that's one of the ways we love, is by not adopting the mindset that if they want help, they'll reach out. Because I wasn't going to reach out. If we have time tonight, we're going to touch on personalities for 3 minutes. But I'm a high introvert. and I was not going to reach out. It just wasn't going to happen. But I'm thankful that somebody interjected themselves into my life and gently urged me to have some hope and to find some hope. So most of my contacts are from within churches. So when I mentioned earlier about families asking what they should do, most of them are Christians or professing believers. That's not surprising because I meet most of my contacts through church connections. I don't meet people off the streets. I mean, I do, but that's not my main clientele. So it stands to reason, I would say to a family, going back to what I said earlier to couple it with this, is I can't tell you what to do, but I'll help you seek what God wants you to do. And when you hear from God, I will help encourage you and support you in that, whether it's to kick them out, not to kick them out, because a lot of people are severely criticized for not kicking out their loved ones that are wrecking the home. But I want to help them find what God has for them. I want to encourage you to listen to God in that. There is no way to do it. There is no one way to do it. But you do need to know what the Lord wants and solicit help with that. I know that here at Forge Road Bible Chapel, I said to Justin as we were setting up tonight, I know you all fairly well and people here, and I have about a dozen churches that are kind of our base churches in Baltimore, between Baltimore and West Virginia. And I'm not just saying it because we're here, but you are you are the church who enacts that the most from my visibility, that love and kindness to people and bearing with one another in those struggles. So I want to encourage and commend you in that. But yeah, knowing what the Lord wants us to do, knowing how much to pay for. Should I give him money? Should I pay for these things? We really can't answer those, but it's not wrong to do that. It's not wrong to help in those ways. It's not wrong. People ask me that. Should I pay for their insurance? Should I cover this? I don't know. It's not wrong to do that. That's enabling. Well, it might be. It might not be. Don't get too caught up in what's right and what's wrong. Trust the Lord if, in fact, you're looking to him, because he will tell us. I know that from my own life. He will tell us to do those things. Reminding them, Justin would have said it, my mother didn't remind me all the time. People ask me when I go to visit them, is my son still getting high? I tell them, I don't know. I'm not the policeman. I'm not here to ask that. Well, what are you doing? That's understandable. But are they still doing this? I don't know. My goal is to try to help them know that somebody loves them, their family, the people around them, ultimately the Lord. Because if they can get that in their minds, there's drugs like the Rat Park, and if they can feel like they belong somewhere, then that desire, it doesn't magically go away, but it really does get squeezed out as they know that they are loved by people, but by the Lord ultimately as well. But no shortage of knowing that they're loved by people. Our ministry sort of tagline, if you will, is befriending with a purpose. And that sounds very kind of, befriending with a purpose. But really, that's what it is. It's getting to know people with the purpose of trying to direct them into the path that the Lord would get a hold of them. And that's loving those in addictions, is trying to do that. We have some workshops. We're here tonight presenting a seminar, and we appreciate that. We've presented a few workshops here over the years, but we do have some of those available to talk about that more in depth. And I would meet often with small groups of parents and family members. Not that I have expertise, but just to encourage them and get them sort of opening up in a safe environment to talk to each other about that.
And I would say that it's, and the question that I will ask John in a second is what kind of what are some frequent misconceptions that people have? One of the questions that we got, and it's kind of the third rail of addiction, is it a disease? And I think that it has brought a lot of attention to it, and John and Steve and I were talking about it. It's done a lot of good to look at it that way, but we still need to remember that, and like John said, to be very careful about how it's put. But we still need to take responsibility for for what we do. And really, what really sort of attracted me to the way that John handled himself was, I always promise I'm not going to say this, but I'd never heard someone say, I don't know, more than John, right? And I love to hear that, because really, most people, they know they're doing wrong, right? I really knew the steps to take if I wanted to stop doing things. I couldn't understand why I couldn't internally. But I would, just like my parents, I was very blessed to have people around me that didn't constantly give unsolicited advice, and that really told me if I asked a question to say, I'm not really sure, and with the unnecessary that you feel from somebody, but I can help you. I can help you, find that out. So I would say that, once again, thank you for having us. Remember that, me sitting here, since you guys are so integral to Stauros, and in the beginning, this is what can happen. We don't have that opportunity to see that a lot, the sort of the good that we do. There's a good reason for that. Really, our heads would get too big. But I will say that, remember, I'm at least one person that I'm sitting here because of what Forge Road has done. So as far as misconceptions, what would you say? And there are a lot of them, unfortunately. I brought up the disease aspect of it because, unfortunately, when something is labeled disease, then it tells people there's a cure, right? It tells people, well, there's a solution. And then we get really upset when nothing works, right? Because you have to get used to, if you deal with someone who is dealing with substance issues or substance abuse issues, if you're looking for results as far as, okay, they'll stop, sort of jettison that idea completely, because the goal is to impart sort of just a little bit of what Christ was. Those are the people that mattered in my life. Those are the people that had an effect, were my parents, were John, people that acted Christ-like. So, as far as like misconceptions, what do you think? What are the sort of the most common ones that you come across that you have to deal with, and how do you deal with it?
I think, as Justin alluded to, a question would be, how many of us think that somebody who is involved in an addiction doesn't realize they're doing wrong? They know that. I know it must be extremely difficult not to remind them of that, not to point that out. We can speak from that side that it does no good at all. I don't blame my mother and people around me for telling me that, because I realized they were exasperated. But part of why we're here tonight is to help maybe encourage the next generations to be careful with that. It really does not help to be reminding folks of that. One of the misconceptions is that we need to do our due diligence to remind them that we're aware it's wrong. There are times when I say to people, I'm not as dumb as I look. And it's just a way to lighten the mood. But I realized a lot of times they're getting high. But no, I'm fine. No, I'm good. And I'm not a fool. I know that, but I don't need to remind them of that. And kind of as Justin alluded, sometimes that can do a better job at bringing conviction upon someone than reminding them that we know that they're doing wrong. Because we're remembering the Lord is the one who's doing the work, not us. And if we are his ambassadors, we're trying to create a safe environment, a healthy environment. Again, I know that there's a lot of danger can be involved in those things, but that's one of the misconceptions, is that we need to make them brutally aware of what's going on. So I think that's probably the largest one that we come across. Again, as Justin mentioned with the disease model, we don't get into a whole lot of that, of what that is. We really just want them to know that there is hope and help. And misconception with a gentleman I met with, another gentleman who passed away. He got hit by a car because his body was failing. But he lived in a garage in Dundalk, and I used to visit with him in the garage. He lived in somebody's garage, and my wife and I, we were running a meeting down in Dundalk for a few years. And one day we pulled into the parking lot, and he stumbled in. He had cowboy boots with metal spikes on the tips and a long leather trench coat and this hat over his eyes, and we thought, uh-oh, what's going to happen? And he said, I heard there's a meeting here. And we said, yeah, and he came in, and he left early, and my wife said, we probably won't see him again. Not condemningly, but just observationally. Next week, he was there standing in the parking lot again, but Gary was his name, and Gary would take me into his garage and show me these brain scans that he had from Hopkins, that his brain was severely damaged from prolonged drug abuse. And one of you had sent a few questions about Bible verses that we use, and so I talked to him, and I believe in Romans 12, when Paul says we are transformed by the renewing of our mind, I think there's something there. And I said to Gary, Gary, I can't promise you that a brain scan a year from now would look differently. But I can tell you that the Lord can change the damage that's been done. And Gary wound up getting saved, professing faith some months later, and down at North Point Baptist Church. He was baptized there by the pastor at the time, and then he got a job and then wound up getting hit by a car. But here was an example of somebody that didn't need to be reminded that he had done irreparable damage. I don't know if his brain scan would have shown anything different, but my wife can attest to him that he was a different man. And that was not because I did anything, but just to encourage him in what the Bible says, that he is a new creation, and that his mind, his psyche can be transformed, whether that's metaphysically or not. LCI, they have a gentleman named Kirk Thompson that provides workshops for them. We went to one of his a few years back. Kirk Thompson from Baltimore, he wrote Anatomy of the Soul and The Soul of Shame, 2 really good books. And I'm not going to speak for him, but in Anatomy of the Soul, he sort of makes the case as, from a neurobiological sense, that the brain can actually be rewired physically. And so we want to pray for individuals that can happen for them, because my brain was pretty screwed up from 20 years, 15 of hard drug abuse. And I'm amazed that I can speak, really, and talk today truthfully. But so we want to encourage you in that, to be careful with how much we remind people of what they're doing. I know it's hard. I would urge you as parents and loved ones to find the support to pray through those things. We did. I want to skip ahead a little bit here for the sake of time. We have a pie chart. I wanted to mention that, I don't know when it was, maybe some of you know, it doesn't really matter, but probably 10-ish years ago, Forge Road was having a seminar here. I don't remember why, but John Ziegenfuss invited me because Stan Farmer from his mansion was here, and he wanted me to meet Stan, so that's why I came. So I was just sitting here in this room, and somebody was giving a workshop. I don't think it was Stan, on communication, and I didn't go to school, literally. I was musically excelled, so I was passed. My teachers passed me because I was in school in the band room all day. I literally didn't take any classes in school. I'm not proud of that. But I didn't learn anything. I never went to college, and then I got on drugs, and I was in a stupor until in my 30s. So I didn't learn much. I didn't know anything about communication. Never heard anything about it. Most of you probably know all this. But I saw this pie chart, something similar to this, and I thought, wow. The words we say, according to this pie chart anyway, and one of the seminars here at the time talked about this. 7% is the words we say. 38% is how we say it, the vocal inflection. I love you. Don't you know I love you? Don't you know how we say it? Thankfully, I won't get into it, as a Teutonic German who has a monotone voice, I don't show a lot of emotion. Unfortunately, it gets me in trouble at times. But it's in there. It just doesn't always come out. I actually thought that, just as a sidebar to that, one of the releasing truisms for me 5 years ago, as a 50-something-year-old man, clean and saved, I just thought I had drugged myself into a non-emotional stupor. And I lived with that for many years. I was traveling with Arthur Williams one year through Germany, going to Ireland. We were going through Frankfurt. And he said, he said, you're quite Teutonic. And I said, thanks. I had no clue what that meant. I just said, thank you. And so that's kind of what prompted me to start studying some of those things. Well, he said, look at the airport. Any airport, there's roughly 50% indigenous people, in an airport. The rest are, travelers. And the Germans and all, they get up and they walk over to the plane, see you later, and they get on, and go their way. Now, I've never traveled through Italy or some of the romantic European nations, but they would hug and kiss and all that sort of stuff. And so when I was involved in recovery early on, I'm jumping ahead a bit here, they were like, you got to hug in AA meetings. I'm like, I don't want to hug. Well, you're going to relapse. Something's wrong with you. You see, and we're laughing, and it is humorous, but that's part of what we want to be sensitive to, is there are people, because of their background, whatever it might be. I lived on a farm, had no neighbors. I didn't have neighbors to socialize with. They didn't exist. I'm a German Teutonic, and I'm introverted. So I could easily be a recluse and a hermit. But God has helped not to be that. But when it came to seeking drug addiction and people trying to help me, go out to this place, go out to that place. I'm like, I don't want to go out there. But I had somebody who came to me and invested in me. So keep that in mind with your loved ones and your friends. Be sensitive. We'll touch on that just for a moment. But be sensitive to that, how you perceive what they might need based on their personality, not just what helped you. Because that was the anti-help for me, was meetings. I rebelled. Another quick story, forgive me. I got converted in 1996, and I was on probation for about 6 years because of my wayward lifestyle. And in 1997, Woody mentioned Tom started coming here in 95, 96. In 1997, I had gotten saved, and I was really struggling with the whole addiction mindset, disease, and you got a disease, as Jane said, that every day you just have to hope you don't drink today. And I said, I don't know if I can cope with that. I don't agree with that premise. I understand the value of it, but I don't agree with that. God delivers us, he delivers us, right? So I went into the probation officer and I said, I can't go to NA meetings anymore. I said, I'm really struggling here. I really struggled. I got up one and left that day because I couldn't sit there anymore. I said, I'm struggling here. I can't go anymore. But I got saved. I said, you'll probably never understand any of this. I said, but I'm going to church. Is there any way that my slips that I have signed can be signed by my church? I said, I met this guy from Ireland, and she pulls a Stauros newsletter out of her desk. Of all the people, he had been coming here for a year. She was a member at North Point Baptist Church at the time. She's since passed away. And that's how God works. And she said, yeah, sure, your pastor can sign that you've been to a meeting. So I did that for 5 years. He signed, I went to Sunday school, went to church and all that. That covered that. But that's just one of the ways that we can allow people to experience the love that the Lord has. That was his hand working, no question. And I saw that at the time. But yeah, so the body language, and then the nonverbal, the eye contact, the folding of the arms, and I love you, that sort of thing. So be careful with that. Again, maybe you already know these things, but just be careful as we extend love. We need to show it. I'm not real good at that. I have to tell you, I'm still learning that. Again, not being an expressive, emotive person by temperament, that's not easy for me. I'm working on that. It's not easy, but I want to do that. And when I go visit with people, we joke sometimes, well, I'm really excited for you. It doesn't show, but I am, But they laugh, So be careful with that, with how we treat others. Just thinking about that pie chart, I was grateful to have learned that here these years ago. Just some thoughts here that, again, that I wanted to look at. We do a workshop that goes over personality types. I presented that on a few occasions over the last years. Last year was a bust. We had to cancel a bunch because of the pandemic. But an introverted person might not do so well being initially placed in a group setting, even in church. Be sensitive to that. Be sensitive to that. That's real. Introverts and extroverts, that's a very real thing. One of the guys I met, he was going to a program over by Seven Courts, and he called my home church looking for some help, and they called me. I won't share his last name, but his name is Dave, and he got in the car and he said, yeah, I got to go to these meetings and stuff. He says, I'm just really struggling with being around so many people. It's just so overwhelming. And I was talking. I said, what's your last name? He told me his last name. It was that long German name. I said, Dave, I'm German too. And I said, I'm not trying to, get real wonky here. I said, but we have a temperament that is prone towards wanting to be alone and not doing really well in group settings. Now, I said, I'm not going to speak against the place you're going, and I don't want you not to go, but I want you to think about that and not be down on yourself for not feeling like you fit in right this minute. Understand that part of that's just probably who you are. But you can learn to fit in, but don't be down on yourself for that. Going back to some of the misconceptions, if I don't want to be in groups, it's because I'm just, want to hide and get high. It might be because you're an introvert. Very real. An extroverted person might not do so well when asked to spend time alone with the Lord. Two men that come to mind, one sadly died last year. I'm talking about a lot of guys that died, but it happens. But one passed away last year. And one night he came, I still remember this, he came to my house one night and said, John, I just need to get some of the stuff out I've been doing. I said, man, you just need to go home and talk to the Lord about that. I'm not sure if I was wrong or right, but after he left, I thought, he probably needed somebody with him to do that. And I felt bad about that. And I did talk to him later about that. But there's another gentleman that he's a high extrovert, and he actually was living in the bedroom where he was physically abused. He because of his situation, he wasn't able to, he lived with his grandmother in a room where he was abused by his grandfather physically. And that was very tough. And his grandmother would say, you need to go into your room and read your Bible. And I'm thinking, how's this guy supposed to read a Bible and commune with God in a room where he was physically abused by a male figure, right? And anyway, so I said to him, why don't you go to the local library? We actually used to meet there some. So he would go to the library and do his study. He had people around. He wasn't interacting with them, but he just had that buzz because he was a high extrovert. He just couldn't bear being on his own. So just think about those things when you if you're encouraging someone to just go home and be alone with God. And if they're an extroverted person and if they have a lot of shame issues they're dealing with, that's not easy to do at all. What do you do about that? Well, we can't answer all that tonight, but we do want to help with that if any of you have thoughts about that in the future. But just to think about that. Temperaments, again, we talk about that quite a bit. There's 4 of them, 2 extroverted, 2 introverted. We're just looking at 2 of them. The sanguine is, in short, the sanguine is the person that one day they love you to pieces, the next day they hate you. It's a personality swing. A lot of people coming off of drugs, I don't get into the medical diagnosis of things, but they often think that they're bipolar. They're diagnosed that. And anybody coming off of drugs really is going to exhibit traits of bipolar disorder because of all the change, right? But sanguine people, if they have a temperament like that, we can understand that. And it might not be the substances. They might be using substances to try to temper that. So understanding a little bit about that. Phlegmatic person, that comes from some of the Greek when they thought we were just made up of 4 fluids, and phlegmatic is sort of the phlegm, it's clearing their throat all the time, and they're just, so phlegmatic people always think everything's their fault. They take the blame for everything. So they're often labeled codependent. So these are some traits that we can pick up understanding people to help us understand how to help them. My wife and some friends are laughing because we talk about these things quite a bit, and it's a good exercise to understand these things about people. I'm sometimes at churches and they don't agree that any of this has value. I don't know. I'm not demanding that you agree that it does. I can tell you that's part of how Russ and I met. Was I was preaching here one day and talked about this briefly, and he said, I'd like to know more about that. So he participated in a small group we had on temperaments, and then I've done a few more after that. It's helped, he would tell you, it's helped him in the workplace, it's helped in many areas, and it's helped us to understand each other better. But that when you're looking at loving the addict, loving the person who is addicted, understanding a little bit more about them is pretty vital. And we can help with these things and direct you in some of those areas. And I apologize, I kind of went through some stuff here a little faster than we had planned, but I told the gentleman that we weren't sure how it would go. It's my first time really trying to do it with a group of folks. I usually just ramble on my own, which I do, more than I need to. But one more thing before we look at how you can help us. Let me just back that up for a second. So we did get a question on some verses, and I mentioned that earlier. Most people, Kurt Thompson's book, The Soul of Shame, he said at this workshop that he's a licensed clinical counselor. Every client that comes into him, 99% of them, their core issue is they're dealing with shame. They have a soul of shame. Their innermost being is ashamed. And it's hard to penetrate that. So his goal is to try to help them with that. When people ask me what's the first thing to read in the Bible, people would often say the Gospel of John or one of the Gospels, But again, I'm meeting primarily with a clientele that is church-oriented, and most of them profess faith. 70% of people I encounter that are addicted profess belief. Some of that's to make them think I'm approving of them, whatever it might be. But the thing I go to is Ephesians 1, mostly with people, to try to help them understand what it means to be holy and blameless. If I say to them, do you consider yourself blameless? No way. I mean, you should see my life. It's terrible. I said, well, see, that's not what it's saying. It's letting you know that because of the death of Jesus Christ and his propitiation, his sacrifice, you are now counted as blameless to God. You are a new creation to him. You're a different person. He doesn't see you like you see yourself right this minute. That's the penultimate of loving the addicted. To know that they have been adopted, what that means. I draw a little drawing of the orphanage, and that Christ came into the orphanage and invited them to leave. And they accepted that. And then he walked them into the new home. This is the new home. Ford Joy Bible Chapel is the new home. Your houses is the new home. It's incumbent upon us to teach them the ways in that place. Are they going to make mistakes, Justin mentioned? Of course. Are they going to relapse? Maybe. Maybe. They might. It's a rare occasion that somebody goes to a rehab and doesn't get high again. That's a very rare occasion. I wish it weren't. Russ read some of the statistics about, addictions and things, how many people seek help, how many get treatment. Keep supporting each other as a church body in walking with individuals. The other thing is Galatians 6. When I was filling in 8 months last year at North Point Baptist Church. Their pastor left somewhat suddenly at the end of 2019, and they asked me to fill in. Wound up 8 months. Now the pandemic was in there, so we were recording messages, but I was serving as an interim pastor for 8 months last year. And one of the most requested messages that we have on tape is carrying others' burdens and what that means and what that looks like. And really, in short, it's Paul talking. It's letting the addict, the addicted, the hurting pour into us. We need to be healthy for that. But then learning to walk that to the cross of Christ and offload it. Not bear and carry. Those two words are used in different versions. But bear is like on my shoulders. Carry is to take it somewhere. But then we also want to take back from the Lord what they need to hear, the hurting. So we talk about that quite a bit. Some of the things that we do to affirm the helper doing that. Well, how you can help us. This is something that I've thought about for many years, and I've actually had a few people offer, but I was tasked tonight with some things that you can help us with as a ministry. We need a team of people to keep a listing of current guidelines of rehabs, detoxes, training for naloxone administration. We don't do that. We don't advocate that. We're not medically trained to do that. If any of you know what that is, it's a spray that you can inject into someone that's overdosed on opiates to revive them. That's a pretty risky thing. You need training for that. But what's happened over the years is rehabs, surprisingly, maybe not, I don't really refer people too often to rehabs and detoxes. That's not my main line of work. I do that probably 4 or 5 times a year, truthfully. Most of my work is meeting with men and women in the midst of life, trying to help them find their way. And some of them need it, some of them don't. But because of that, I don't have a good listing of that. But this is something that could be for, not just for us, but for Ford Joy Bible Chapel. But what it would require, because I've had some people offer this over the years, is about every 6 months or so, you need to call the rescue missions and the hospitals and America's Keswick and his mansion and find out what their current parameters are. Because somebody calls me and says, what do I need? And I'm like, I'm not sure. I'll have to call. That kind of thing. That would be a great help to us. But I would ask if you were willing for that you would have the skill set for that. We've had some people offer that really didn't have the skill set to call the places and be sort of diligent to keep up with that. And if you were interested in that, let me know, and we will help pursue that. And that would be something that could be shared with other churches, not just Stauros. But I would value that, because when I do need it, I have to go through my listing, and then I find, that one's closed. In 2008, when the market crashed, about 50% of the helps for addictions disappeared, and most of it hasn't come back. And then with the pandemic, it's all thrown in an uproar. So, and then healthy recovery meetings. We want to know, the gentleman called me the other day about his son, and he said, I want him to go places where he might hear about the Lord and stuff. And so we want to have it better. I don't deal with meetings much. I meet one-to-one with people. So having some team of people or an individual who would do that, that would be a great help to us. It would be a lot more help than you might imagine. Allow us to present other workshops. Caring for the addicted is one we've presented here in a rudimentary form, but we've modified it because we got feedback and we've changed it some. And that's about a 4-hour workshop where we cover in depth more of what we're looking at. And understanding people, allowing us to do that. That's where we get a little bit more into what people are like and why they do what they do, why they don't do what they don't do. The top one here, not as basic as it sounds. A man and a woman from each church to sort of be an ambassador for the hurting. I can tell you that I've had a number of people go into churches and are swarmed and overwhelmed by people trying to help. In the workshop, we talk about the woman caught in adultery, and Jesus was a buffer between her and the accusers. Now, somebody coming in, when I walked into White Marsh Baptist Church 20-some years ago, I was convinced there was a spotlight on me that said loser. And that's what people are thinking. And for people to come rushing over to me, my friend Phil Winfield, some of Justin knows, and some of you know, he was playing music with us last week at my home church, and he said, we were talking about a lady, Bessie Stewart. We used to run from her. She would come barreling over to hug you. We're like, I don't want to hug. We don't want to. We just, we're losers. We're castaways. And she didn't mean any harm by it, but that was off-putting to us. So having somebody as a buffer, and we help with some of that. We're not expert, but we would help with some of that. And this is for some of the other churches that might be watching, and then as we share this with other churches too, some of the local churches to have that. That's not as easy as it sounds, as I wrote that in there. And then identify a potential worker, somebody that would meet with people. You might know somebody that, much like Justin, that would say, I'd like to maybe meet with people. I mean, Russ had offered this gentleman I mentioned who revived his son. We were talking the other day. He says, I'll go with you to visit the father. So we may do that, but actually somebody who would do that, and then also we would be a training resource for those, whether it's Stauros or not. Woody mentioned that Stauros helped form his group, and they did things a little differently than we would. So, but they supported Jim and Dottie and Doug and Brenda and Lois and Bill in the early days, and developments and such. Just want to close with some resources, and then if you do have any questions, as Maddie mentioned. We would ask it, but again, we'd almost prefer that you would come to us privately and ask them. But we'll be here for a few minutes. But so we have our website, staurosministries.com. You can go there, and we're going to be updating that soon, but it's comprehensive now. We have a book here that I got last year, but pandemic sort of cut off my ability to distribute it much. We had these on the back table. This is a book called Out of the Depths. It has a picture of Arthur Williams on the front. It's the story of his life. Being converted from a drunkard, and then forming the ministry of Stauros. And then it has brief stories. Woody's in here. My wife and I have a little story, but also others that are being talked about in there. So we have those books. We ask for a $20 donation if you can. I have a box back there. If you'd like one tonight, just put that in the box and take a book. There's a stack of them out there. I have this postcard out there as well that just Stauros Ministries. It has a little bit of information on the back. Please take that. I have some business cards out there and a few other bits and pieces we have out there. We also have a YouTube channel. It's under Stauros Alive. It's mostly music. Justin has really ramped up our ability to record and present, and we find a lot of traffic from that. I get a lot of people that send these videos. They're not about addictions. They're just videos of us playing, contemporary music. But it's one of the vehicles, our group, we've been here before, it's one of the vehicles to help. But you can go on there and subscribe and watch the videos. We're going to eventually working towards having some some of the clips that from tonight, we hope to excerpt them and put them up there as little encouraging discussion points and such, so you can find that on there. And then we have a SoundCloud page, which is audio, and that's Stauros Ministries. So you can go there and find there's messages from Arthur Williams, from myself, from Mike Williams. Mike never got to preach at a retreat because it was canceled a few times, but he was scheduled a couple of years ago to come. So we have messages on there and testimonies and other things like that. So you can share those with other people. That's fairly new. Justin's been helping to get that going. And again, I mentioned the postcards and some business cards out there. So that's what we have for you tonight. And I hope that you found just a few, maybe one or two thoughts that would help you understand what's going on with people, not just an addiction. That's really I did it to cover up loneliness and hurt. I didn't do it because I wanted to be an addict. I did it because I didn't know how to socialize with people. I had no clue. I didn't realize part of that was my heritage. It wasn't my fault. And I thought it was, and so I was ashamed, and I took drugs to numb that, heavy drugs. If you can pick up on that with your loved ones, that's not easy to do, but it's important. And understand what's really going to be helpful to them. Because what was helpful to the next guy wasn't helpful for me. I'll say this in closing, my part anyway. Many of you know Jim Traban Sr. He and I would be very different. Jim would go in and take the bull by the horns and take somebody and fix them, so to speak, right? I mean that in a complimentary way. I would sort of walk in and and kick my feet, and maybe, so we are very different people. Different people will respond different ways, and I've sent people his way that I realized I really couldn't be helpful to because they needed a little more in-your-face kind of thing, So we're different in that way. And so pick up on that with your loved ones and think about what's going to be best for them. And again, if we can help with that at all, we're not expert by any stretch, but I've been meeting with people for 20 years now, and thankfully have learned quite a bit. Our workshop would give a lot more info. And again, I apologize for sort of dominating here, but we knew that we had a lot to try to pack in that we wanted to share with you. And again, we hope that it's been helpful. So I don't know if anybody does have a question you wanted to ask. Again, I know I took most of our time. If not, we're going to be here, and I'm available. My email's all over, all that stuff out there, the literature and things. You can find it very easily.
Can I say something before we close? I know just about everybody here, I think, and I've been with Stauros for a number of years, and Forge Road Bible Chapel is a very mission-centric assembly, and we just really appreciate your support, both financially and prayerfully. We just covet your prayers, so if you could just keep us in your prayers. It's a hard ministry. It really is a hard ministry, and it's not cut out for everybody. And like John said, when he compared himself to Jim Trabian, you can put yourself into that picture too. You might go and try to reach out to somebody and try to help them, and it doesn't work. And you think you're a failure. Well, I'm not cut out for this, but the same person with the same issue could go to another person that's identical to you, has the same personality, temperament as you, and they click. And John and I have done some of this before, whereas John just can't click with a guy. And he'll send me and see if I can help him. And sometimes it works out and sometimes it don't, but you gotta realize that it's not 100%. I mean, we're all people. We all have our own quirks, and some of you guys might not care for me, and that's okay, because I'm annoying sometime. And I told Tom, I apologized to him one day, Tom Shetlick. I said, Tom, I know I annoy you, and I apologize. He said, you don't annoy me. I said, Tom, I do annoy you, and I'm sorry. It's just our personalities. And I'm sure I annoy a lot of people here, and in a fun way, but I do apologize if I do. So we're all different. We all click differently with different people, and you just have to accept that, not as a failure, but as try something else. So thank you for that.
Well, can we hear me? We good? Good. All right. Let's give these guys a hand. Let's thank them. I really appreciate you guys being here, and I thank you so much for sharing this with us. Some of the feedback we got back from the last couple sessions were that y'all wanted something to do. Like you guys were like, what can we do? What is there something? And I really appreciate the fact that John outlined stuff that we can do to not only help the ministry but help the people around us that are suffering. And I just I encourage you as a church body to take advantage of that and take advantage of what these men are doing and the help that they need. Just thank you again. I'm gonna pray, and then again, they're gonna be here. Another thing to take advantage of if you have questions. So let's pray. Lord, we thank you so much that you don't leave us alone for this difficult problem in our society. We thank you so much that it's not up to us to deal with it. Lord, we thank you for Stauros ministry, and we just ask that you continue to work through these men and to help them reach the people of this community that are suffering from addiction. Lord, as we go out, I just pray that you will put it on our heart to be a part of this ministry, to be partners with the ministry, to keep an eye out for people in our lives that are struggling from this. And just, I pray that we take heed to what these men have shared with us tonight. Lord, we love you, and we're just grateful that we have a place to talk about these issues.